but I see it, God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son as a ransom sacrifice.
You're quoting Scripture again, but why wouldn't God just forgive us if that's what he wanted to do?
He could have done it that way, but he chose, being the God that he is, allowing for us to have free will. And it wasn't just grumping an apple. There was more to it than that. Adam was plainly disobedient, and I think he even admits it himself in the fact that he hid from God that particular evening, because there was a fellowship between man and God every day.
So Adam was disobedient, and that sin reverberated down the ages, is inherited by all humans. What kind of a doctrine is that? Inherited by all humans and had to be redeemed by the Son of God being tortured to death. What kind of a morality are you propagating there?
That's a very good question. Paul puts it very well in Romans chapter 5.
Well, Paul invented it, so he would.
No, because Paul was in the era at the time of Christ, and we're talking 4,000 years before that. Paul said that just through one man's disobedience, Adam, death came to all mankind because all have sinned. You know, that's why we needed another perfect life, and Paul talks about it very clearly, much better than I do, that the ransom price had to be a perfect life. And that's another reason why he was born of a virgin and had no earthly father, because of the bloodline. But, you know, we could argue all day about these things, and I haven't even got to some of the emails. But
okay.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Those of us schooled from infancy in his ways can become desensitized to their horror. A naïf, blessed with a perspective of innocence, has a clearer perception. Winston Churchill's son, Randolph, somehow contrived to remain ignorant of Scripture until Evelyn Waugh and a brother officer, in a vain attempt to keep Churchill quiet when they were posted together during the war, bet him he couldn't read the entire Bible in a fortnight. He has never read any of it before and is hideously excited, keeps reading quotations aloud. I say, I bet you didn't know this came in the Bible. Or merely slapping his side and chortling, God, isn't God a shit? Thomas Jefferson, better read, was of a similar opinion. The Christian God is a being of terrific character, cruel, vindictive, capricious and unjust.
But, you know, I just wondered, and I mean this with all sincerity, is there something in particular that really you can't stand about God?
About?
God.
Well, I don't think God exists, so obviously that wouldn't apply. There's something I can't stand about Christianity, which is just what I've been saying about this really obnoxious doctrine of original sin, which I think is actually hideous and demeaning, and it's a vengeful doctrine. It's the idea that that one can be absolved, that a sin by somebody else has to be paid for by a different person, which is a horrible idea. Everything about it is an obnoxious doctrine.
Again, I can see where you're coming from, and I mean that with all sincerity. But let's take the case, say, of a thief has gone before the courts and he's guilty, even though he might have said he wasn't guilty. You know, it's proven he is, without doubt, and he's sentenced, and quite rightly so. The judge, because he's a good judge, he says, right, you're guilty, but I'm going to pay your fine, or even go to prison for it. In a way, simple way, that's the way I see how God set up for his son to be the ultimate sacrifice. And I can't think of...
Well, that would be persuasive if the judge said, you're forgiven. That would be great. That would be the kind of thing one could empathize with. But that's not what he said. He said, OK, we're going to hang somebody else for your crime.
No, the judge said, I'll give you my son. Now, wouldn't that be incredible?
I think it would be disgusting. I mean, I think it's a horrible idea that somehow, given that the judge is all powerful, given that the judge has the power to forgive if he wants to, that the only way he can do it is to sacrifice his son. I mean, what an incredibly unpleasant way to do it when given that you've got the power to forgive, you're all powerful.
I see it differently, that he loved us so much that he was willing to do that. And having just gone through a terrible week with the tragic death in our family, sudden death of a young boy, we would have... You could see how much God must have gone through to see his son go through that painful sacrifice.
That makes it even worse. I mean, it makes it even worse what he would, given that he could have simply forgiven. Well, forgiven us.
We don't know. For example, there could have been a conversation between the Son and the Father in heaven before coming down, and maybe in that sense Jesus said, I will do it. And there could have been it's a hypothesis,
but that presupposes that it was necessary for somebody to do it. Why not just...
It had to be somebody perfect.
And but why did it have to be somebody sacrificed at all?
A life for a life.
A life for a life, exactly. What kind of a morality is that?
Well, I personally believe that helps us to live a good life and respect for each other, that I would stop, if I was angry at someone, from taking their life and letting it go further, but to forgive.
Well, I would forgive as well, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about a life for a life, which is very different. But you had some other questions, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
One of my favorite bumper stickers I once saw was, I don't know and you don't either.
Well, I don't know and you don't either. I thoroughly approve of that, especially if when I say you don't either, you're a religious person, because the great fallacy is to say science doesn't know, therefore religion must be right. And that, of course, is a total logical fallacy. There are plenty of things that we don't know. There are things that science doesn't know. But if science doesn't know something, there's absolutely no reason to think that religion does know it. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that there's a kind of religious default, which we default to when science can't provide the answer. Science is working on the answer. Science, in some cases, may never get the answer, but that's absolutely no reason to think that therefore we default to the religious answer. Certainly not.
Evolution is a process that takes a very long time for interesting things to happen anyway. It takes millions of years for really major evolutionary change to happen. You can see it happening. I mean, we do see it happening in a small way, but of necessity, what you can see during a human lifetime is relatively short, relatively little. And in my book, The Greatest Show on Earth, I've given some examples of that. But the burden of the question is, if you can't see it happening before your very eyes, doesn't that mean that you have to have faith in order to believe it? The answer is no, of course it doesn't. Because what you see is the traces, the remains. You see the consequences of the evolutionary process, even though you can't actually watch it happening before your very eyes. It's a bit like, I've likened it to the process whereby a detective comes on the scene of a crime after the crime has been committed. Now, the detective can't actually see the crime being committed, but what he sees is fingerprints, footprints, bloodstains, scuffs on the carpet, all these sorts of evidence which add up to an understanding of how the crime was committed. So fossils are of that type. DNA is of that type. If you look at the DNA in different animals, compare, we've got it up here, beautiful picture you've got for the backdrop. If you look at the DNA of different animals, for a start, all animals and plants have the same DNA code, which is a remarkable fact in itself. And then that there are minor differences in the actual sequences, the actual letters that are spelled out by the code. And if you look at those differences, you find that they form a perfect hierarchical pattern. It's a family tree. Now, this is massive, massive, massive quantities of evidence left lying around the earth in every species of creature that's ever been looked at. is carrying around massive quantities of evidence in the DNA. Then there's fossils in the rocks, massive quantities of evidence, lots of other evidence.
Yes. I want to be very clear that I do think that religious education is important. I don't think that children should be left ignorant of religion. I think they should be taught about religion, about the great world religions. What they should not be taught is you are a Christian, you are a Catholic, you are a Protestant, you are a Jew, therefore you believe X. I think it's right to say there are people called Christians, there are people called Catholics, there are people called Muslims, and these are the things that they believe, and that's very important. I think it's extremely important to be given a sight of the holy books of the world, because they inform world literature. What I do not think is that children, when they're too young to understand, should be told, you are a Catholic child, this is what you believe. That, I think, is wicked.
I'm keeping a tally of the people walking out. I think it's about 3 or 4 so far. One of Einstein's most eagerly quoted remarks is, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." But Einstein also said, "It was, of course, a lie what you read about my religious convictions, a lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world, so far as our science can reveal it." As I continue to clarify the distinction between supernatural religion on the one hand and Einsteinian religion on the other, bear in mind that I am calling only supernatural gods delusional.